Right. Hello, hello, hello. Right. Hello, hello, hello. All right. Sounds like we're good. Okay. Welcome everyone. It's yours truly, Baphomet, and we are now going on to the third trip now of the book by Dr. Timothy Leary, The High Priest. So, just a bit of a recap of the last one. It was when they were in this mansion and they were having a bit of a guide through their mushroom trip. And apparently there were two different ones. There was like a male and a female. And it's sort of like the whole trip report seemed to have just broke down in poetry, which was kind of interesting. And I sort of went on to a little bit of a weird monologue and that kind of thing, and I started singing in sort of prose because I actually really enjoyed that. So yeah, basically a lot of the trips that seem to have be put out here. Some of them are done in seriousness, some are done in prose with poetry and that kind of thing. Some of the trip reports are a bit different, and that kind of thing. So yeah, but we are now getting into the third trip. The guide is Jack Leary, The Taming Power of the Small. I guess this comes with the fact that sometimes children can actually, in a sense, contain more wisdom than adults, and I know this very well. From being a young child, and I think every child can sort of attest to it, that there have been times where they've actually been more correct than their adult counterparts, even though they're 5 and they haven't lived a life that far. There's a certain superpower that children do have at such a young age, and another thing, fun fact is, most of the divination, when we're talking about things like the Goetia or spirits and things like that, they usually use children to be mediums and scryers, because apparently they were much more sensitive to that kind of energy more than anyone else. So they are, so yeah, even royalty would use children for the sake of divination. So there you go. All right. There we go. All right. Well, let's begin on the third trip. All right. So the revelation is awful. September 1960. Guide Jack Leary, The Taming Power of the Small. The wind drives across the Hammond, the image of the taming power of the small. Thus, the superior man refines the outward aspect of his nature. So I think that's got something to do with being a child again, childlike wonder and all that other kind of thing, which is something we all need to restore, because that's sort of been gone and beaten out of us. Sort of goes back to revelry and things like that. All right, let's begin. At dinner the night after the visions, the maid asked if she could take the mushrooms over to the servant's cottage to show her husband. Ah, Lola, you want him to find you some? Lola's eyes narrowed and she made a gesture of disgust. No, senor. Malos, muy malos. Ruth leaned forward. Rapid Spanish. Why do you want your husband to see them, Lola? The maid took a step backward, crouching. So we will see them, senora, and know them and never eat them. The plate with black twisted mushrooms was on the mantel. When I picked it up, several flies spiraled away. Lola held the plate at arm's length and scuttled from the room. Lola's face had a look of bitter dread. I didn't know that we were to meet this same fear of visionary unknown at every step along the road to come. Ruth was looking out the window and she turned with a puzzled smile on her face. Strange sight, she said. Lola's half running across the lawn with the plate of mushrooms in one hand and crossing herself with the other. There was fear in the air the next day in Mexico City. A censter on the Paseo de la Reforma, the broad grand pride of Mexico. 12 cars wide, split by grass strips and tree lanes, lines with statues, sweeping into round, wide glorietas, humming like a power line with speeding cars. As I drove along near Sanborns, the traffic slowed. The American Embassy building was ringed with hundreds of police troopers, black boots, black leather belts. They looked half fierce and half embarrassed. I remember reading about the left-wing student riots. Cuba si Yankee no. The government was moving with a nervous show of force. I was having lunch with a sociologist named Lewis. Trouble as usual parking, and I found him waiting at a table in Prendes. He declined a cigarette and hesitated when I ordered a Vermouth, and then decided to join me. He talked about his studies of village life in southern Mexico and Guatemala. He had lifted the lid and poked around inside, and what he described wasn't pretty. The sick, the miserable, the bullies, the victims, the hopeless. The grinding pressure of no money, lousy food, distrust, waking before dawn in a cold hut, your body stiff and crusted with yesterday's sweat and dirt, your mouth sour, your bowels running, haunted by your depths, your fearful ignorance of why it all works out this way and what to do. Yeah, I think everyone can sort of attest into situations like that, lacking money and that kind of thing. Sort of my situation at the moment, actually, unfortunately. But I'm confident it will change. I actually want to touch on that because I think this was really important. I was watching like a past podcast from Joe Rogan talking to Maynard James Keenan, and he talked about, well, you should try and do things without the expectation of compensation. And usually I would roll my eyes towards that. Like, of course, it's actually true that you should do things without the expectation of compensation because it will usually lead to something being useful or something down the line. I've yet to see it because I've only just started. But what really, really hit home, actually, is he said, because in the end, you are going to be working much harder for much less. And I could not actually argue with that. And I think that's the reality of most people. We actually do work really hard. Most people do actually work hard. It's just we don't get much for it. Pure and simple. And I think that's the real crux of the apostrophe. But obviously doing things with the expectation of compensation is actually a bit hard. And it's like this fear of lack, which stops us from doing a lot of other things, or fearing that we won't actually feel pleasure as well. All right. Lewis really told you how it was in concrete terms. Human helplessness. No happy theories to explain it away either. I liked him for that. We ordered seafood and I had a half bottle of smoky Mexican white wine. Lewis was a sensitive man. He was disturbed by what he had seen and had to write about. He loved the Mexicans and hated sociological theory. He was bitter because he had been attacked by the political book reviewers and the psychoanalytic book reviewers and the theorists and his American colleagues who saw a rich, passionate, Freudian warmth in his villages. He had heard vaguely of the sacred mushrooms, but had never paid much attention to the reports about them. Mandy and I took the elevator way up to the skytop restaurant of the Latino American building. We sat drinking tequila and looking through that glass wall out over the Valley of Mexico. The air was hazy blue except where some white clouds hung over the western volcanic peaks. The whole historic bit was right there in front of us. There was the dusty flatland around the airport, which used to be a lake, and the old colonial section with crumbling horizontal churches and palaces, and the skyscrapers running out to the modern sections. And there out beyond, the acres of tenements. We watched airliners sliding down sloping trajectories, and I thought of Dick Alpert flying to Mexico to pick me up in his Cessna at the moment, somewhere a mile high over Jalisco, poring over his air maps and checking the green patterns below. Looking for the landmarks to guide him in the Guadalajara airport, had started taking narcotics too early in the day. Wine at lunch, tequila in the cocktail lounge, and by the time the good restaurants were serving dinner, I was heavy and tired. Liquor contracts consciousness, soggy symbols. Mandy was being a very college girl. I was missing the Semitic mermaid with the sculpted lions and got bored and irritable. A classic liquor high. Around midnight, we ran into Poet Betty in the mariachi section. By this time, the taste of tequila was perfumey, obnoxious, and the lime taste was acrid with the and the musicians were puffy, polter pigeons buttoned in their fake or ranchero costumes, just as sick of singing the same old ballads as I was of hearing them. Oh dear. When Guadalajara, fucking hell. This is not good, man. Dinosh closed at 1 o'clock. We had coffee in the mariachi market, and I drove Poet Betty home and then stood in the hallway of Mandy's house, and for a moment I felt the message of the mushrooms, which is the wordless, mindless rapture of the moment. I started a miserable debate with myself about the next move. I wanted to drive Cunacava, but I knew that I had to come back to meet Dick Alpert at the airport next afternoon. Around 3 in the morning, I was standing in front of the hotel. Reyes, leaning against a lamppost, sodden, tired, hung on the hooks of indecision, deciding whether to drive back or sleep the rest of the night in the city. The coin came down, stay. As I turned to walk to the hotel entrance, my shoe caught in a metal hook sticking from the bottom of the post. I moved forward, my shoe caught. I fell. Crouched on the sidewalk on my hands and knees, I looked up. A group of taxi drivers and Mexican hotel hangers-on were standing at the lobby entrance. Their talk stopped and they turned to stare down at me. My eyes moved from one face to the next. And then I lifted myself up slowly, slapped the dirt from my hands, and walked into the hotel. When I got to Mandy's house for lunch, there was a message. Dick Alpert had phoned from Guadalajara. There we go. I would be landing at Mexico City Airport in an hour. I found him closing his flight plan in the operations office. Dick is tall, blonde, and boyish, full of silly enthusiasms, and during his 3-day flight down the west coast and over the mountains, he had fallen in love with Mexico. We piled his luggage in the car and stopped at a tienda for beer and potato chips and headed out past the university on the toll road and started climbing through the cloudy passes out of the valley. Dick stretched out his legs in front seat and began telling me how happy the Mexican people were, how much more sensible their life was than the American. On his flight down, there was always a cab driver who would see him circling over the town, and by the time Dick had set the plane down on cow pasture runaway, the taxi would be waiting for him, and sometimes there would be not one but 2 or 3 girls in the cab for him to take his pick. They're relaxed, they smile, they love music, they know what the important values are. That's right, Dick, I said. And when they get bored with their small town and their cab and their whorehouse where they work, why they just jump in their plane and fly away to the next country that hits their fancy. Dick flashed his modest boy smile. I suppose I'm talking like the typical naive American tourist. The happy native bit, they're stuck. They have no choice. Is that right? I told him that I didn't know, because I didn't know. But I'll show that the Mexicans had no secrets that Americans lack, because there weren't any Mexicans at all, but 50 million men and women with eyes and ears and brains and hearts more or less hung up on their own mental chessboards, different from our chess pieces maybe, but hung up all the same. Yeah, so that is actually quite a poignant sort of part that he's talking about there, with everyone's brain sort of being a chess game. Because what sort of causes a lot of breaks in our consciousness is a weird schism that we have, or it could just be a dissonance pattern. And that's sort of why we have that sort of, you know how you see cartoons where there's like an angel and then a devil sort of whispering in your ear? That's sort of what the landscape of our unconscious is like, more or less, because there's no unity between the two, so there's a schism. And the only way that we can sort of be more effective is to sort of close that gap. But he's also saying that everyone's chessboard is different. The game rules might also be different on how to sort of bring it all together, and the chess piece and the pieces would be different. So that's one thing to keep in mind. All right, let's continue. So I didn't know. Ever since last weekend and the mushrooms, I didn't know as much anymore. I'd started the slow process of throwing things out of mind, junking mental furniture that has been clogging up my brain. I used to know a lot about Mexico, generalization, theories. Now, I was beginning to see that all I knew were faded memories of a few hundred conversations with Mexicans about Mexico and faded memories of a few books written by American minds in American words. An American head trip imposed on a different way of life. I knew nothing really, my words. Lies, just memories of myself, strung along the wires of my mind, dick spinning theories about Mexican starter, the chuckling, mild replica of the mushroom, laughter. I think that's just sort of going through the whole process that his preconceptions of Mexican culture was essentially breaking down while he was there. And that everything was sort of breaking down all the same. It's a bit like when during colonialism or when civilizations first meet each other and they might be extremely different and there's just no way to really understand cultural conflict and all that other kind of thing because they're all coming from a different place and interpretation of customs and things like that. And what might be seen as normally customary to one might be seen as a insult to another. A good example of this, actually, I'm going to write the timestamp down of this. A good example was in the movie Dune, or rather the book, where I think it was like the leader of the Iraqis was meeting up with I can't remember the Ben Gesserit, and I can't remember the full names of the characters, but what's important is they were meeting each other, and what ended up happening is they were talking, and then the Iraqi just spat at his feet, and of course the Ben Gesserit took that as a major insult, but somebody managed to step in and say, no, that's actually a compliment, because spitting out your fluid towards someone else is actually a sign of respect, because fluids are incredibly important, because obviously how dry the desert is, how scarce water is. So basically it was almost a gift to just spit at the ground. But otherwise in pretty much every other culture, it's like, ugh, yuck. Ugh. But yeah, that you get the idea. Now let's continue. We had just passed the summit at Tres Marias, and we were heading down the long descent to Morelos. I began to tell Dick about the mushrooms. He listened to my story, and then he surprised me with his response. Sounds very much like marijuana. You never tried it? Same reaction. Feeling of detachment, intensification of color and sound, euphoria, sense of having discovered some great wisdom. Everyone's been smoking pot for years around San Francisco and Greenwich Village. There are regular cults of tea heads. A friend of mine gave me 2 pounds of pot where he left for Europe. I smoked it for a while, but got bored with it, and finally it dried up and I threw most of it away. This was some development. Was that all I had experienced? Were the mystic visions and the oriental dreams just a stronger version of a Greenwich Village pot high? I had been sure we were on the verge of something new and great. A pushing back of the frontiers of consciousness, but now it looked as though I was just as naive, sheltered intellectual discovering what hip teenagers on the North Beach had been experiencing for years. The late afternoon thunderstorm was going full blast as we rolled down the last long straight into the Kernakava. Dick decided to spend the first night in Tepoztlán. Never mind. With the McClellans, who were renting a house for the summer. the Tepozletan road at sundown, herdsmen nudging along their cattle, Indian trudging home from the milpers with machetes and rakes over their shoulders. The rain makes for a greater scene. The headlights on the white poncho slumped over plodding burrows. The valley of Tepozletan is haunted. It's the nave of a prehistorical cathedral with the roof blown off and the huge pillared cliff walls and still standing, and the land is always damp and dark green and teeming with sad memories. Dick's story about the marijuana and the rain and the tequila fatigue from the last night, they all began to hit, and I felt disillusioned. The hexagram represents a configuration of circumstances which a strong element is temporarily held in leash by a weak element. It is only through gentleness that this can have a successful outcome. Okay. Interesting. Anyway. Thursday. I was clear and sunny. I spent that afternoon lying by the pool. I was way behind on my writing, but all I did was soak up sun and sweat and think. I tried to ask Dick deterring about the mushrooms, but he didn't want to talk. He was worrying about giving a lecture in Spanish. He had given the speech 100 times in English, but he had no ear for Spanish, and when he read this translation, he sounded like a Midwesterner reading names from the kind of cover telephone book. He seemed to have forgotten the mushrooms. When the sun would get hot, I'd take my son Jack's rubber water goggles and his snorkel breathing tube and swim in the pool. The mask made everything under water seem sharp, clean, clear, grained surface of pool, abstract canvas, blue tile border glowing, sapphire ribbon, living green threads, hung in azure, sun-specked water before pool was pool blue water. Felt good when held, now giant fluid gem box. Yeah, so I think he's just describing how the experience changes when you're altered. And things do, and the experience of a lot of things do change when you're altered. For better and worse. So I've heard, like, particularly from musicians who know how to play on acid, apparently, like, playing on acid is apparently something else. It's, like, it's incredible, especially if you're really good at it. So, that's good. The pool had not changed. My retina and the brain stuff behind it had changed. Turned on. The water hadn't been drained in 2 weeks, and all that green algae stuff, however beautiful to the mushroomed eye, had to go. Yeah, certain things become more beautiful when you're high. Even stuff that you would usually consider more disgusting. And I think that's actually interesting because maybe it's not that bad for you, and we've sort of been conditioned to see certain things as bad or whatever. So that's interesting. The next morning, we were expecting special guests, the Soviet cultural attaché, come down for the day. I met him twice at cocktail parties where he had been surrounded by my countrymen, politically wise beyond their years for reading Time magazine and liquored up enough to think they could win the great debate. Both times I had felt shame at the spectacle, and I moved in to talk friendly with him about Russian education and his impressions of Mexico and Cuba. He was young, new at his job, eager to be liked, well-informed, terribly confident, proud of his country, and when tight, pathetically puzzled as why Americans misunderstood him and his peaceful intentions. I wanted things to go smoothly with Leonov, and his friends arrived for lunch. The pool should be emptied and cleaned. This meant a clash with Lola, the maid. To her, it meant extra work and a larger water bill to explain to her absentee landlords. Nothing for her to gain, something to lose. Passive resistance. Also, she had changed since I took the mushrooms. She was suspicious. I had angered her somehow. Made her afraid of me. I knew she'd stall until 3:30 so our water would drain on the 8th green of the golf club after sunset. At 3:30, I mobilized my son and Pepe, his friend. If we cleaned it now and started filing at sundown, it would be full enough for the Russians to swim the next day. Pepe, go tell your mother we are going to clean the pool. Lola came darting out of her cottage. She shook her head as we talked. The gardener was at school. Mana es mejor. Hear me, Lola. Tomorrow is Friday. Come friends tomorrow from Mexico. Necessities much time to fill the pool, correct? We must clean the pool today or wait until Monday. True? Okay, Lola, you are the director. We shall wait. But she didn't. In the morning, the pool was clean but empty. A thin trickle of fresh water puddled on the bottom. No one would swim today, Russians or Americans. Ruth was drinking coffee. She was calm and amused at my anchor. That's funny. She defended the maid. Lola was in the kitchen. When I finished giving her my opinion, I banged my hand on the metal sink. Ruth's cold, disapproving eyes followed me into the bedroom. I was in a rage, undercut by both women. Gone, mushroom tranquility. Yep, I don't know what that's like to actually be extremely angry on a trip. It's probably not pretty. Yet to experience that. I was still smarting when the Russian came. The day went badly. It was hot and they had brought their bathing suits. Aztec duplicity exposed American inhospitality to communist diplomat. We sat by the end of the pool listening to the thin splash of water and drank too much too early in the day. I talked to him about the mushrooms, but he wasn't interested and became irritable. The weary pushing of alcohol-soggy symbols back and forth across the board. He wanted to know why Americans used germ warfare in Korea. The only mistake the Russians made in Hungary was to delay sending in troops. Russian women were by far the most beautiful in the world. The American secret police would arrest me if he came to see me in America. I was going to give him my address so that he would be sure to visit me in Cambridge anyway. But after they left, I remembered I had forgotten. Lola had stayed out of sight most of the day, and when she appeared down on the lawn feeding the animals, our eyes never met. The next day was my last day at the villa. Dick, Alpert, and my son and I were to fly back to California after the weekend, and the weekend continued bad. Gerhard and Juan and Mandy arrived at noon. They brought no mushrooms. Gerhard had climbed for 3 hours to reach the village, but Juana, the witch, was nowhere to be found. No one knew where she was nor where she'd come back. The villagers were mysterious and evasive. They didn't bother any of the last week's veterans. No one really wanted to repeat. I was expecting one prospective mushroomer late in the day, but I wasn't disturbed by the thought of his missing out. He was an anthropologist who had spent 3 years in a Mexican village, which he now called My Village. And he and his wife sang Mexican ballads together and produced endless facts about Mexican life. He was a pleasant intellectual chap, but scared stiff of the mushrooms. He wanted to take them because it was like a duty. If he was to know Mexico, he should know the native ritual. Gerhard had an idea. We can give him the mushrooms left over from last week. They dried by now, but that's all right. They retain their potency indefinitely, just to make sure we can start him out on a stronger dose. The anthropologist and his wife arrived at 2, and when I went to the gate to let them in, there were 3 American college kids about to ring the bell. They were friends of poet Betty. The boy was a Princeton sophomore, and the girls were just starting at Mount Holyoke College. The college crowd went inside to change into swimming suits, and I mixed drinks and sat in the dining room talking with the anthropologist about the mushroom situation. He said he was willing to try them dried. His wife would watch. He was extremely nervous. "Do you wish to look, Frodo?" said the Lady Galadriel. "You did not wish to see elf magic and were content. Do you advise me to look?" asked Frodo. "No," she said. "I do not counsel you one way or another. I am not a counselor. You may learn something. Whether what you see to be fair or evil, that may be profitable, and yet it may not. Seeing is both good and perilous, yet I think, Frodo, that you have courage and wisdom enough for the venture, or I would not have brought you here. Do as you will. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, people." "I will look," said Frodo, and he climbed onto the pedestal and bent over the dark water. Obviously, that's obviously a weird sort of allegory for initiation into the mysteries. I haven't read the actual books of Lord of the Rings, but I think that it's sort of interesting to note that, knowledge is, it's good and it's perilous. It can because when you come into a state of knowing, it can be quite depressing and it can drive you mad if you're not careful. Yeah, it's not whether it's good or evil. It's good or perilous. Well, it's both, really. At the end of the day, when you're getting into the mysteries and self-knowledge, even to look in yourself and to look at yourself from a higher vantage point, is good and perilous. So, and I think that's what causes some people to shy away from psychedelics. Or, yeah. Anyway, let's continue. 358. I was worried a bit about the anthropological panic and decided to round up someone to take the visions with him. If necessary, I was resolved to join him myself. Although I had no desire to do so, the college kids were the only ones around the villa who hadn't mushroomed, and when I asked them, they said, sure, why not? The young kids were the first people I'd talked to who were not automatically reflexed frighteningly at the idea of expanding consciousness. Ain't that interesting? I think this is what's quite interesting, is because when you're so young and innocent, I'm actually going to, write that time stamp down. Because when you're so young and innocent, like, a lot of this stuff no longer becomes scary to you. And as your brain is still expanding and you're still wanting to explore and that kind of thing, kids would generally be much more open to even criticism if they're told the correct way. Because I recently had this experience talking to a kid, and he I pulled him up on something about how he was actually treating me, and I didn't do it with criticizing, like, oh, how dare you, and that kind of thing. I was like, hey, did you notice that what you just said to me? And have you noticed that you actually bullying me in a sense? And he's like, oh shit, oh, I didn't actually know that, I'm sorry. And I said, I'm not angry. And he's like, oh yeah, I'll be more aware of that in the future. Kids are actually much more receptive at that than adults give them credit for. It's actually adults who are usually not receptive and pretty full of shit. So we'll continue. The psychedelic generation. So we all sat around the dining room table while I counted the black twisted knobs into 5 bowls. 8 for Anthro, 8 for Princeton, 8 to Tall Mount Holyoke, 8 to Short. And 8 in the 5th bowl, which I kept in front of me. 3 college kids examined the dried sticks curiously and popped them into their mouths. They went through their bowls quickly. Good little children. Then they sat back happily waiting for the trance. No answer. He picked up a knob, studied it from every angle, sniffed it, asked several questions about their origin and their effect. Yeah, fear. Yeah. I could see drops of sweat on his brow just below the hairline. Damn. He didn't look happily. Finally, seeing that we were all watching him, waiting, he bit the end of the plant and made tasting sounds. Then his face scrunched up. Woo, they taste rotten. Are you sure they aren't poisonous? And they took another bite and asked about dysentery. He continued to eat very slowly, forcing them down. The green bowl in front of me became a magnet. Why not take them and return them to the Garden of Ecstasy? More wisdom waits there. My mind argued for taking the mushrooms. So simple. There they are in the bowl, 10 inches from your mouth. But there wasn't one shred of desire pushing me towards them. My brain said yes. The second experience will be more enlightening. It will give you a basis for comparison, but I was scared too. I must have spent 5 minutes sitting there holding a black knob between my thumb and forefinger. Finally, I threw it back and pushed the bowl away. I take them if Dick Alpert wants to join me when he arrives. The college crowd had long since drifted out to the patio, lying on beach chairs waiting. Anthro still sat stiffly in front of his half-emptied bowl. He never did finish them. His wife sat next to him in solemn silence. After 30 minutes, after 40 minutes, after 50 minutes, nothing had happened. After an hour, the colleges ate the rest of the mushrooms, and after 2 hours, there was nothing to do but apologize like a poor host. The college faces were fallen into disappointment, but Anthro and wife didn't seem to mind. Okay. So they must have had some dud mushrooms. Let's keep going. I should probably try and read some of the side of these things, but it just disrupts the flow. Leary, maybe I'll read them at the end of every page now. So let's backtrack a little bit. And demanding that this period be a moratorium on historical legislation on punitive arrest of young people for possession of LSD. If at the end of 1 year the older generation is not taking advantage of this ceasefire, I predict and indeed a firm statement on part of everyone involved that they intend to resume the use of psychedelics, that they will exercise their constitutional rights to expand their own consciousness, whatever the cost. Yeah, so I think people need to just get the fuck out of people's lives, honestly. And if it's about safety, it's like, well, you know what? If you jump off a fucking building, like it's while you're on psychedelics, it's because you're fucking retarded. Okay, you're fucking retarded, pure and simple. Each time I've had psychedelics, I've never had the desire to go do something fucking retarded, ever. Not once. Not jumping off buildings, not trying to see if I can stab myself in the chest and see if I still live. None of those things. So, yeah, it's just silly. Like the whole notion, but you might hurt yourself. You know what? We nearly hurt ourselves every fucking day getting in the car. We might hurt ourselves driving to work. We might hurt ourselves going on the sidewalk. We might fucking roll our ankle going for a bushwalk. This idea of safety is just, it's bullshit, okay? And the reason why I'm getting so riled up about it, because I'm sick to death of hearing this safety bullshit. It's not to say that you shouldn't take precautions, but safety doesn't exist. In fact, I was probably in much more danger from removing myself from danger. So there's that. Playboy. What do you say to the standard charge that LSD is too powerful and dangerous to entrust to the young? Leary. Well, none of us yet know exactly how LSD can be used for the growth and benefit of the human being. It is a powerful releaser of energy as yet not fully understood. But if I'm confronted with the possibility that a 15-year-old or a 50-year-old is going to use a new form of energy that he doesn't understand, I'll back the 15-year-old every time. So yeah, the youth can actually can be much more powerful. Actually, I'll continue this spot here. Why? Because a 15-year-old is going to use a new form of energy to have fun, to intensify sensation, to make love, for curiosity, for personal growth. Many 50-year-olds have lost their curiosity, have lost their ability to make love, have dulled their openness to new sensations, and will use any form of new energy for power, control, and warfare. Think about Congress, man, and think about fucking Parliament. Think about all those politicians, all those 60-year-old old fuckwits. Just they have dulled everything, and it's all about gaining power and all other kinds of things. And I think the worst part, especially, is like how they try to act as like arbiters of morality. Like, since we always talk about America, I'm going to talk about Australia for a little bit. So we have a lot of politicians who talk about like morality in marriage and stuff like that, but he was found to be cheating on his wife. And we also heard about things such as like, you shouldn't, like property and that kind of thing. But probably the most the biggest scandal we had in Parliament was when an unknown politician masturbated onto a staffer's desk, and there was just this puddle of cum on the desk. It was fucked. And another one was when it was believed that Christopher Pine, one of our politicians, who's still in, fuck man, it actually makes me angry to think about it. He there was testimony about it was the anonymous male prostitute was fucked inside Parliament House in the prayer room. Wasn't unholy enough that you did it somewhere where law happens. You also had to go to the fucking prayer room and fuck a male prostitute. It's just like, bro. And yet these are the same people telling us, oh, psychedelics bad. Don't take them. It's for your safety. It's for your own good. Anyway, I'm going to go fuck a male prostitute and masturbate onto a staffer's desk. It's like, come on, man. Anyone who believes politicians at this point is just... Anyway. Continuing on. So it doesn't concern me at all that the young people are taking time out of the educational and occupational assembly lines to experiment with consciousness, to dabble with new forms of experience and artistic expression. The present generation under the age of 25 is the wisest and holiest generation and the human race has ever seen. And by God, instead of lamenting, derogating them, and imprisoning them, we should support them, listen to them, and turn on with them. Fucking amen to that. Hallelujah. Let's continue anyway. All right. Dick Alpert and the McClellands from Tepolazada arrived at some more people from the capital dropped in, and a professor from Amherst got lecturing drunk, and a state department officer who was bitter about his job and our Latin policy, and his boss got very funny, sarcastic, drunk, and the others sat around the table and made intellectual talk. And that was about the way the summer in Crenacaba ended. Oh no, there was one final incident on Sunday morning. I went through the saddest routine of packing and checking the house over and over again, finding things that I had forgotten. Not enough room in the trunks, and all this with a hangover and not enough sleep and a lousy feeling that had persisted all week since Dick Alpert told me about marijuana. Lola was still keeping out of sight, and when I did intersect her in the dining room, she looked at me with distrust and narrowed her eyes as though I were dangerous somehow. And when the last suitcase was locked, my son made the inevitable discovery that a toy had been left out. It was a plastic machine gun that shot corks. He and Pepe had been ambushing enemy all summer with their guns. It was large and bulky and impossible to pack. Then an image of Lola in the final scene occurred to me. Look, Jack, I want you to leave the gun here, okay? All right, but why? People already have one. Never mind. Watch and you'll see. When I took the last suitcase out of the car, I was carrying the gun. I laid it carefully on the driver's seat. Then I gave Lola 250 pesos, and we said goodbye and promised to write, and we moved out to the sidewalk. Dick Alpert and Jack were in the car. I called Jack out and handed him the machine gun. Jack, give this to Lola and say this is for her. You see, it was my wish to drive off waving to Lola and to have her standing by the gate with the gun in her hand. Victorious defender, Solidaritera. Nice wholesome picture of Timothy Leary. Let's just read the side of this again, because these are actually, I'm a bit upset that I actually kind of skipped them and didn't pay more attention now. But yeah, so I'll read them before we continue every other page. So for the side here. From the reporter, when the International Federation for Internal Freedom was formed by Cambridge, Massachusetts during the autumn of 1962, it was unique even in the New England, a region not unfamiliar with eccentric social movements. IFIF pronounced if, as if the speaker stuttering over some terrifying cosmic question. If preaches the gospel that man's salvation lies in the expansion of his unconsciousness. There you go. A state which is asserted can be achieved through the ingestion of such substances as LSD-25, psilocybin, mescaline, or even the right type of morning glory seeds. Right type of morning glory seeds. Interesting. Although a handful of well-known people, most of the philosophers, mystics, and theologians had have lent if supporting of their names. Scientific circles have in general been quite critical of many of its expressed beliefs and goals. The support of the theologians and mystics, in combination with the fact that if's cause was unwittingly nurtured within Harvard University, had composed the movement principal credentials. All right, let's continue here. I stood behind the car and watched Jack come up to Lola, make his speech, and watched her take the gun and look surprised and then laugh. She seemed to understand and she seemed pleased. She called something to me. "I'd be back soon," I said. She was nodding and smiling, and when the gun went off, her face froze and she saw the cork bounce off my chest. Her eyes dropped down to the trigger, still held taut by her finger. Then when she saw me laughing, she lifted the gun in front of her face as though it were an apron to hide behind, and she began to giggle. We were all grinning like pleased idiots as I got back in the car and made the U-turn, and as we rolled off and waved adios, I was laughing and she was standing with the gun in her right hand. Hence the image of many clouds promising moisture. Okay, yeah, winds over heaven. Hence the image of many clouds promising moisture and blessing to the land. Although as yet not rain falls, the situation is not unfavorable. There is a prospect of ultimate success, but there is still obstacles in the way. And we can merely take preparatory measures. Only through the small means of friendly persuasion can we exert any influence. The first time has not yet come from sweeping measures. However, we may be able, to a limited extent, to act as a restraining and subduing influence. To carry out our purpose, we need firm determination with gentleness and adaptability in external relations. All right. Next morning, I had trouble giving my car to the government, and it was mid-afternoon by the time I got to the airport. Dick went to the meteorology to see if we could beat the evening thunderstorm out of the valley, and my son collected a crowd around him and his iguana in the airport lobby. Dick came down saying we had 15 minutes of clear weather and Acapulco was blue and clean, so we rushed down to the Kessner, and we stuck the iguana on a shelf behind the rear seat and we kissed Betty goodbye. Dick ran up the engine and we turned the corner onto the main runway and rolled down the wide concrete highway and faster and lifted up over the brown swamp flats. And when the tower said, okay, we left the frequency in flight part of the field and turned right and began climbing to make the height of the Tres Marias when we didn't make it at the first run. We circled, gained altitude, looking down at the dozen of round green hollow cone volcanoes scattered over the Valley of Mexico and finally squeezed over the pass at 14,000 feet. And a half hour dropped down to over Tepoztlán and ran the length of the valley twice, buzzing the McClellan's ranch and dipping the wings when they came running out to wave and turn towards Conacava and circled the villa and saw Lola and Pepe standing by the swimming pool, now quite full. Thank you. And we're surprised to see how many jet blue albicars were set alongside of how many lush villas in this rich little town that Hernando thought he conquered. All right, so let's continue on this side again. Now what we got here. For many initiates, the credentials have been sufficient. If offers by its very existence a certain amount of justification rationale to those who submit to the dangerous attraction drug-taking holds for college students and young people in general. Drugs have always attracted college students. I was told recently by Dr. Dana L. Farnsworth, director of the Harvard University Health Services. But this is the first time in history that an organization has existed to promote their use. Interesting. Caught unprepared by the utilization of a variety of hallucinogenic drugs in many areas of the U.S., law enforcement officials and health authorities do not appear at present to possess the means of coping with the problem. They are hampered by a net of vague, ineffectual, and contradictory legal structure. Interesting. We are high in the sky. Goodbye down there. There's a fog on USA and my friends have frost their way. We will be up there soon, they said, and they have ground themselves instead. Please don't be down. Interesting form of poetry. Anyway, let's continue. After we passed Lake Tequesquetengo, Dick began to teach me how to fly, and he began learning how the two dimensions and not knowing how to trim the plane, fighting the sliding of the horizon while Dick bent over the map and drew red lines and made calculations. It was all pretty mushroomy, sitting up there a mile high, beating out our own path where no one else had ever been. Beyond games, in touch with only the living moment. Should we climb those clouds or sidestep them through the gap to the north, in touch with only this immediate reality? Is Acapulco there or there? Realizing as we fail to realize down below, although it is as true down below that we are a moment away from death and not caring for even that abstraction. Death because it's not a word or a concept, but a right now decision about this peak, that cloud, this push, or the rudder which turns toward our Acapulco airport on the mountain cliff. All right, so yeah, that concept of death is quite important. It's not literal death, but the only real way. But most people don't really choose to die, but usually death will show regeneration, and it's showing in my life too with my recent events of quitting a job, cutting certain people out of my life and that kind of thing. There's been a lot more regeneration, and I sometimes need to remind myself of that too. So yeah, there's that. All right, let's look at the side panel. Meanwhile, in If's 4-room ground floor headquarter at 40-story Street, Cambridge, a varying number of blue-jean young people perform the clerical chores of a growing organization. They work to spread its chapters and outposts through a country in the world and push an aggressive promotional drive that has all the earmarks of a proselytizing campaign. Proselytizing campaign. Yeah. Oh, okay, so there's like a little infinity symbol that denotes it. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, so let's read this little section. Maybe I'll try and read the sections instead. Okay, here we go. For LSD by Albert Cohen and Schuyler, it is hard to imagine the fantastic growth of LSD use in the United States since 1962. I believe approximately 4 million Americans took LSD last year, judging from conversation with suppliers. Perhaps as many as 70% of all users are high school and college students. This is important, I think, because I'm going to write that down. So, like, a lot of the future belongs to the young. So, indoctrinating young with the correct mindset. And by the way, the word indoctrination doesn't always have to necessarily mean it's bad. If you indoctrinate them with the mindfulness to always raise their consciousness and to do their will, that's much better than, say, submit to the government, do as you're told, and shut the fuck up. Yeah? Good. There we go. Cool. Let's continue, shall we? We were flying at 110 miles per hour with the jagged cotton fields 10 feet below stretched out as far as we could see. The world was completely shut off. Somewhere down below were the mountains of Guerrero and Acapulco Bay and the Pacific, but we were above and out of it, scudding along the mile-high, white-capped ocean. Dick was leaning forward, studying the horizon and sweeping his eyes down and over the instruments and then back to the front. He turned to brief me. Here's the situation. Where are I K up here? Well, high enough to miss this stuff. He was pointing to the orange peaks on the map. But sooner or later, we'll have to land, and that means diving down blind through this white crud. We can't turn back? No, that's not good. Mexico City is already socked in tight, and if we try to chance it north or south, there's no guarantee that the clouds will break. At 5:45, the Acapulco Tower received a call from an aircraft on the Unicorn. What we'll have to do is keep flying high and wide until we get well beyond the coast, out over the ocean, and then we plow down through the clouds until we hit the clear above the ocean, and then we'll have to turn back and run the coast until we find Acapulco. All we have to do is be sure we fly far enough to miss the coastal range and hope there's enough ceiling over the Pacific. but the aircraft identification was unintelligible due to poor transmission. I'll see if I can get Acapulco Tower for a reading on their ceiling. Dick fiddled with the radio dial with his left hand, and then he took the black plastic mouthpiece in his right hand. Acapulco, this is Cessna 46 Bravo. Do you hear me? Repeated attempts to establish radio contact were unsuccessful. We waited, listening to the engine hum and the rush of air past the cabin windows. Acapulco Tower, this is Cessna 46 Bravo. Coming Acapulco. No answer. Maybe they don't catch the English. You call them in Spanish, just pull the knob here and talk. Okay, I'll read that little bit. From Psychedelic Prayers. What one values in the game is the play fluid. What one values in the form is the moment of forming fluid. What values in the house is the moment of dwelling fluid. What one values in heart is the beat pulsing. What one values in action is the timing fluid. Indeed, because you flow like water, you can neither win nor lose. Huh. Interesting. All right. Okay, continuing from the thing there. Nothing was seen of the plane or its occupants until 14 days later. The mouthpiece was cool and the black wire curled away and down below the instrument panel. I looked back at Jack strapped in the rear seat. His eyes were big and calm, serious. A farmer checking timber in the mountains came upon the burned wreckage of the missing Cessna. I cleared my voice. Acapulco, somos Cessna, 46 Bravo. Acapulco, Cessna, 46 Bravo. No answer. Dick made a disgusted noise. Maybe they're on a different frequency, or maybe they're out to supper, or maybe they don't have an operator. So what do we do now? Dick motioned with his hand for me to take the wheel. Here, you take over. I'll try to figure out where we are and when we should hit the coast. Keep the compass on 270, and for God's sake, keep the altitude where it is and just fly her straight. Examination of the wreckage showed that the aircraft struck trees while flying in a straight and level altitude. And I was all of a sudden sitting there a mile high in the sky with 3 people and an iguana and several suitcases and a ton of heavy plane holding the whole business up with just my 2 hands glued to the co-pilot's stick. Yeah. That would be fucking terrifying to be up there in the sky, just flying a plane when you're not qualified to. It was obvious that my hands clutched to the wheel wouldn't hold up to the plane and its load. It cut through the trees for a distance of 416 feet before it finally came to rest. I held on tight, squeezing the metal circle in my hands, afraid to move my feet on the rudder or relax my grip because then we'd drop like a stone in a mile-deep well. I could feel drops of sweat rolling down from my armpits. The grey snowdrifts ahead seemed to be rushing at us. Is he fucking doing this while he's high? Because this is called trips. Man, I think I'd fucking have a panic attack if I was trying to fly a plane while tripping balls and I didn't know how to fly a plane to begin with. The grey snowdrifts ahead seemed to be rushing at us. I squeezed the wheel harder. It could not be determined whether or not the pilot had received a weather briefing prior to takeoff. Panic, control, frozen panic. Yeah, I was just talking about panic. There's fucking panic. My mind hung up rigid. Panic. Hey, you're losing altitude. Pull her back. I sat not moving except to pivot my head, look at Dick. For the area in which the crash occurred, firecraft called for widespread stratus and fog. He had a puzzled look and moved his fingers lightly to his stick and nudged it gently back. The nose of the plane rose and I saw the indicator level off. Dick was grinning at me. Keep us there, old man. Ceilings were expected to be 800 to 1,200 feet overcast with visibilities or from 2 to 4 miles. Fog viable to 200 feet. From Time magazine, here we go. Or like the Time, I'm guessing. It's probably going to talk, I just saw a little bit, it's probably going to talk about how it looks bad. An epidemic of acid heads. The disease is striking in B-side beatnik pads and in the dormitories of expensive prep schools. Fucking hell. It has grown into an alarming problem at UCLA and on the UC campus at Berkeley, and everywhere the diagnosis is the same. Psychotic illness resulting from unauthorized non-medicinal use of the drug LSD-25. Patients with post-LSD symptoms and provide the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute with 10 to 15 of its cases, more flocking to the university's General Medical Center in the country General Hospital. By best estimates, 10,000 students in the University of California system have tried LSD, though not all have suffered detectable ill effects. No one can even guess how many more self-styled acid heads there are among oddball cult groups. This fucking acid Leary. Florida's terrifying. It sounds like that bit's going to go on for a bit, so I'll just go back up to where we were. The confident smile of the experienced guide broke the spell. I left off squeezing the stick and pulled up towards me and felt the rushing air pushing under the plane. Solidly holding it up there a mile high and pushed the rudder left foot and saw the needle swing slowly back to 270. And I and the plane were flying along just so smooth up there above the white caps, and I began to grin and to feel with it. High. It was decided that the airplane struck the mountainside at 2,700 feet. I turned my head around, squeezed Jack's leg, and grinned at him and thought about how great and brave he was and how I loved him. And I looked over at Dick bending over the charts and thought about how lucky it was that I trusted him and how he trusted me, and that was it. The goodness of the moment, the three of us together. And this was the way it always should be on the trip. It was then its solid instrument weather conditions. No worry about getting down or coming back to the ground. Dick was wise and skilled and trustworthy. You couldn't ask for a better there. Which precluded the possibility of the pilot ever having seen the terrain until it was too late. And soon Jack back there with his blue shorts and his sunburnt legs and his tousled hair and his always dirty face, smiling back at me and not worried, trusting me. And I was thinking that life is really no different anywhere in air or down there. Aren't we always just a breath away from death? And all that counts up to here or down there is to be with people you love and trust and not caring about the future or the past, gone and done. And less meaning that the air pocket we bounced over a mile there is a minute back. Wow. Okay, that's actually good advice, because we too often we are always, it's true, we're always really close to death at any point. And I think a big part of that is because we don't really know when we're going to die. There can be, it's like if the lightning don't get you, then the thunder will. I think we take for granted that we sort of flirt with death every single day. Every day. And that's why the whole idea of safety is bunk. We flirt with it every single day. I risk fucking getting hit by some pinger pilot of a driver on the highway when I'm driving my car. I risk blowing a tire and then crashing into a fucking tree and dying. I risk getting hit by a drunk driver. These are all related to cars, but we still drive them. And the point is, yeah, we're always close to death, and we just got to be with people we trust, really, is the real lesson. Yeah, we're always close to death. We're always close to running out of money. Life is way more fragile than we tend to give it credit for. It doesn't mean be reckless and all that other kind of thing, but it means you should probably stop trying to make a world with padding on every fucking pole or like soft floors and all that other kind of thing. We should be over Acapulco right now, said Dick. His head was still turned down to the charts. Then he looked up and said, Hey, look. At this, he was pointing over there to the left to a tiny hole in the grey cloud, a peephole, a rent in the cotton fabric, and through its glistening the blue water of the ocean. Okay, let's continue that story from the California Euclid sort of thing. Florida is terrifying. Southern California devotees proclaim the alleged benefits of LSD with evangelistic fervor. They say it brings supernatural powers. Of course, that's bullshit. Preternatural is probably the term that they used, but they of course twisted their words as the fucking yellow journalists tend to do. It does not say Ookla, psychiatrist. Some say it's an aphrodisiac. It is not. Say it helps with the user to solve his emotional problems. It may, but only if the solution is already in the mind, hidden behind an emotional block. What LSD actually has done far too many users, says Ookla psychiatrist resident D. Fisher, is to produce florid psychoses with terrifying visual and auditory hallucinations, marked depression, often with serious suicide attempt, and anxiety bordering on panic. What's interesting is none of that is actually entirely untrue, but that's how they get you. Because in order to sort of make people feel afraid, you actually need to have the truth in there, but you need to twist it in such a way, and that actually solidifies the truth. This sort of goes with religions as well. You twist the truth. And LSD is sort of no different. So yeah, twisting the truth is really important for a lot of this sort of stuff. All right. Done writing that down. One patient tried to kill himself when he thought his body was melting, and he remained suicidal for more than 2 weeks after only one dose of LSD. That's probably because he became quite aware of his predicament and how much he hated his life, as does tend to be the case. Okay, I'll read it down to here, then I'll go back to the story. Other patients have required more than 2 months of psychiatric hospitalization. Still, others have been sent to state hospitals for long-term treatment. Adds Ookla psychiatric J. Thomas Ungalida. The symptoms may recur in the original intensity long after the last dose of the drug. Many users have had this experience. The variety types of LSD used include vast numbers of thrill seekers. Most have tried marijuana, then the amphetamines before graduating themselves to what they regard as the ultimate in kicks. In this rebellious student group like those at Berkeley, many are trying LSD because they feel lost on an impersonal, bustling campus. Interesting. It's interesting that I'm reading that article as I'm quite literally going back to university today. And I think that's actually really important. So that's sort of a synchronicity and a half right there. Yeah. So, yeah, others have been squeezed by the need to make better grades to avoid the draft. Fucking thing of fear, man. It's unreal. One of the most disturbing aspects of LSD binge is that it has hit high schools and prep schools. Damn. Anyway, let's go back to where we were, and I think we're actually quite close to the end. Yeah, we passed that psychedelic Leary. Let me take her down. That hole is closing fast. He swung the stick over and rolled the plane dizzyingly on its side, and we're bound to fall sideways. Stomach gasping, ears hurting, and by now the hole in the clouds was smaller than our wing spread, but we needled through it, falling sideways, left cheek pointing to the lovely green, endless rippling world of water below. And the next problem is to find land and to run up the coast of Acapulco. Dick was banking sharply to the right, and we turned to the long corner and leveled off. There were the high cliffs on one side with the hotel stuck on top, and there way over the right was the higher promontory rolling on to the sea slopes. To the sea. With the villas and hotels nailed to the slopes. Yeah, I mix up shit all the time, man. I think this is... Maybe there's a way to deal with dyslexia a little bit. And we were slicing a line right smack down the middle of Acapulco Bay. We had hit it blindly right on the center. The wind can indeed drive the clouds together in the sky, yet being nothing but air without solid body, it does not produce great or lasting effect. So also an individual in times where he can produce no great effect in the outer world, can do nothing except refine the expression of his nature in small ways. We had breakfast next morning on the open terrace of Caleta, looking down at the morning beach and the red surfboards bobbing on the blue bay and over the Roqueta, the island palmy and green. Then Jack sprang again the question he had been springing all summer and never answered about how about skydiving? He was now or never, because we were flying north at Summers and Dick pulled out a map and checked the mileage and we counted up the flying hours on our fingers, and Dick looked at Jack's hopeful eyes and said, "Sure, we can afford an hour or two for something important like skydiving," and Jack began to grin. Lovely kids. I rented a set for Jack and me, and we walked with Jose to instructor down the beach, all of us in swimming trunks, and Jack carrying the heavy air tank. I was to dive first for a half hour while Jack watched, and then he was to take over. I stood knee deep in the warm surf, and Jose lifted the tank on my back and began strapping me while I braced my legs against the weight. The belt of round lead slugs got tied around my waist and the rubber mask over my eyes, and Jose showed me how to clear the mask of water by tilting the corner and blowing, and he stuck the rubber tube end in my mouth, and I felt the cold surgical taste of oxygen and heard the hiss of the air rush, and a cast iron mechanical duck waddled with thin feet out beyond the breakers, and Jose's brown arms motioned down, and I took a deep gulp of the cool, rubbery air in the mouthpiece and pushed down under the surface. Down to no place, I didn't sink and I didn't rise. Just stayed there suspended a foot or so underwater, getting used to breathing through a tube and fighting the panic. The panic bred of the lifelong habit of rising the surface to breathe. Jose was right there by me, and I watched the bubbles up around his face and looked inside his mask at the black eyes glaring out, and saw his hands motioning down and his sleek brown legs pumping and him slicing down fishy deeper. Hands and feet fitting him along, he stopped and turned and made wavy gill motions, and I got the point and pushed clumsily with my hands up and kicked and started dropping down, and there was the bottom, sandy and clear, every brown grain and sharp focus, and the bottom creatures, tawny purple shells and spinny quilled animals breathing softly and clean rocks. We were swimming along together slowly, two giant humpback fish nosing across the new bottom world. Jose turned and put his thumb and forefinger together to ask okay, and I made the same sign. Sure, okay, and I saw his eye inside the mask smiling at me, and right there at the moment, everything became okay. Exultant new world vision. A new frilly freedom. Down, down, down in the bluegrass light world. Okay, so we got another one from this. From the Associated Press. LSD 25 and similar drugs that drastically alter sensory perception have the power to permanently cripple the mind. Oh, get fucked. I mean, our own drugs that we give out by the dozens, such as benzodiazepines, dexamphetamine, Adderall, Ritalin, they all have the fucking power to cripple the mind as well. Yeah, we're fine giving that out. Even weed, really. Like, I'm not against it, but like, the amount of people who I see smoke weed are fucking retarded. Not all of them. Some of them are quite successful and some of them are quite good, but like, a good chunk of them, I just can't even. And I think this also goes for alcohol as well. We allow that sort of running wild, and that certainly permanently cripples the mind. That's fine. That's fine, though. But because LSD has the power to permanently cripple, let's get rid of it. Anyway. Free, weightless, fin-driven, free from earth, free from air, from the first time free from gravity grasp, dirt-free, talk-free, path road and sidewalk-free, free to slide through trackless sea space, thinking of the world above. Did it ever? Do they really walk around up there? Bodies draped in cloth, feet in leather boxes, fixed dimension flat paths, through dust and spit and dung, and cigarette butts, through cooking smells, exhaust fumes, through noise, horn, screech, fart, squeal, cough, clash, and talk clatter. Hear clear water still sliding silence of the deep death, only hiss of tubes, spilling upward, bouncing, bubbly laughter. Down there, it's not a wet world. Wet is land talk. Down there is not a worry world. Worry is land think. No job, no worry, no money, no hurry, no past, no future, no think, talk, walk, no hating, no waiting, no striving, no reading, writing. Just so everything's so new. Damn, that's poetry. Okay, let's go this part and see what they have to say about it. From Cosmopolitan. So serious do physicians and psychiatrists view the fad for this drug that Dr. Roy Grinker, chief editor of the AMA's Archive of General Psychiatry, recently wrote an editorial in his publication warning that the drug could be fatal if used indiscriminately. I don't think anyone's actually died from LSD itself, the drug. I'm pretty sure it's never happened. People have probably certainly died doing dumb shit or like panicking and that kind of thing, but never through the drug itself. I think you need to consume some stupid amount for it to be fatal, which you'll never need. And that many psychiatrists had become so enamored with its mystical, hallucinatory state that they were disqualified as competent investigators. He further complained the drug was being imprudently publicized and endorsed by movie actors and television artists. This last crack was a direct slap at Hollywood, where LSD received its first major burst of publicity, where some of its most devoted rooters live. Actually, Hollywood was buzzing over LSD as far back as 1959. It began when two Los Angeles doctors published the results of an experimental therapy program they had conducted with 110 patients, including Cary Grant, his wife, Betsy Drake, and several more Hollywood actors, publicists and writers. The reaction to the paper was explosive. Joe Hyams, Hollywood correspondent for the New York Herald Tribune, who did one of the first interviews with Cary Grant about LSD therapy, told me recently, after my series came out, the phone began to ring wildly. Psychiatrists called, complaining their patients were now begging them for LSD. Damn. And they probably should have. Every actor in town under analysis wanted it. In all, I got close to 800 letters. Cary Grant today is still eager to offer this testimony to the efficacy of the drug. If I drop dead within the next 10 years, I will have enjoyed more living in the latter part of my life than most people ever know. Yeah, and I actually completely agree with that. Ever since my sort of journey, ever since I went to Ecuador, I've enjoyed my past 3 years way more than I've ever enjoyed my entire life. Like, I would not want to fucking relive my earlier life. And don't really like talking about it. And I don't think it's wise to share this shit on this channel. So, I'll continue. When I asked Grant if he thought his association with the drug had hindered his development, he brusquely. A Hollywood name might have created some resistance, but many people will seek any reason to oppose a new idea, you know? Yeah, 100%. What time are we at? Let's go to 1:18. More and more. Okay, it ends there. Good. So, more and more of the California intelligentsia began to push the drug from his houseboat in Sausalito, philosopher Alan Watts spoke of a society where LSD pills would be taken 2 or 3 times a year, like aspirin, to relieve temporary emotional headaches. Aldous Huxley wrote glowingly of his mystical LSD flights. Poet Allen Ginsberg urged that the drug be given to Crawford and Kennedy in the interests of world peace. Damn. Okay, let's continue. My teeth were clenched hard on the rubber mouthpiece, jaw muscles taut and hurting. Snap. Molars clanked together, mouthpiece bit through. Can't hold tight in my mouth, water seeping in mask. Did he say swallow or blow out? Vision blurry from water in mask. Hiss of air, keeping cool, what situation? 10 feet under, 100-pound tank on back, 100-pound leads on belt, water in mask. Trouble holding shredded mouthpiece with teeth. Fear, panic, fear. Can I go back? Weighted down with metal. Trapped. Can I get back? Want to get back. Want my dirty world back. Maybe trapped. Want go back now. I squatted down with my feet on the sandy bottom and pushed up. Uncoilingly torpedoing up. Whoosh. Breaking up through surface with splash. Ripping off mouthpiece. Mask. Gulping free air. Blinking at sunlight. Splash beside me. Jose. Face amused, worried back on the worried dimension. Con calma, hombre. I was breaststroking, lunging towards shore, wounded walrus, white air tube dangling on side. Jose holding me with one arm, holding my mask with his other hand. Standing in waist-high surf, gasping for breath, shoulders heaving, heart pounding, shaking off water and fear, not listening to Jose's voice soothing and advising. I was thinking about the rapture of the sea, deep in the far-out visions and the clean unity of the sudden panic coming from the fear that you can't go back to the world you love to leave, and thinking of the fear of mushroom rapture. Will I ever go back? Panic, loss of control, panic. I had my daily ration of expanded consciousness and was glad to feel dry and sand underfoot. Jack was eager to take over the diving. He stood casual, almost bored, while Jose and I strapped him in the metal uniform. He didn't seem to be listening to my words of advice, and when Jose nodded to him, he pulled on the mask and stuck the mouthpiece and waded out, knee, waist, shoulder high, and sank out of sight. I stood on the shore watching the 2 lines of bubbles moving out in the bay. Jack was gone, dropped down and out of the world, and I was standing there, scared, worried, stuck on the sandy shelf of mine, but Jack was gone beyond it all. Once again, kids being more present. 4 Mexican kids had followed the diver's trail across the bay. They had goggles but no tank and kept bobbing under for a breath length to watch the underwater action. I called one of them back to shore and asked him how it was going with El Nino. White teeth grin. He had seen my panic. Perfecto, senor. I walked over to the beach bar and ordered a planter's punch and sat the half hour out watching the bubbles and the boys moving around the bay out beyond the fishing boats, and then circling back, and finally Jack's black-headed bobbed up and he scoffed through the shallow water, bent over a little from the heavy tank, still looking bored but also cocky proud. The natural, non-conceptual confidence of the young, the psychedelic generation. We walked back to the diving shop and Jose started making out the bill. The owner asked him in Spanish how it had gone, and Jose grinned and said, Muy bien, el hijo es machos más miedo que el padre. I hope I did that right. Jack looked at me and I winked, and he creased his face in a big grin, and that was the diving trip. The taming power of the small has success. Dense clouds, no rain from our western region. And we are done with the 3rd trip. A bit tired, I might actually I have to give my vocal cords a rest. And I'll start making a bunch of shorts too. Because I got a lot here. That's for sure. In the 1st and 2nd trip. So that's interesting. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed reading that as much as I did. Please like and share and subscribe to the Yours Truly Baphomet YouTube channel. And I hope to see you guys soon. Bye for now.